Hey T, welcome back to the channel, man. As always, I'm stoked, pumped up to see you. Today we're going to be talking about close quarters battle, and we're going to explain what it is. We're going to go over some principles and fundamentals of CQB. We're going to put some stuff up here on the whiteboard, if you will, and hopefully we're going to unpack some of this stuff because, you know, I realize that this may be a little out of the norm, right? Normally we spend a lot more time talking about the green side training, but truth be told, you know, the black side is just as important when it comes to field craft and when it comes to survival, especially in today's day and age, right? So you can imagine, just looking over the past couple years of all the incidents that we've seen, all the crime rate increasing, all of the mobs and the rioting that's going on, and a lot of families are worried and they're concerned about what may be coming in towards their home. And so people are starting to think more about bugging in, and they're starting to think about bugging out, right? So as it turns out, I am a former close quarters battle team leader in a fleet anti-terrorism security team company based out of Norfolk, Virginia. I have actually more time institutionalized training, more operational time, and more time deployed being in this realm than I do in anything else. So I hope to put some of this into your all's kit bag. Right, so if this is something that you're into, make sure you leave some comments down below. That way we can continue to add some more additional training like this into the battle rhythm for some upcoming and future events. Hey man, this is what this channel is all about. It's all about field craft and tactical virtue, man. If that's what you're into as well, make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell so you can stay up to date on some future content. So the first thing we want to do is define what close quarters battle is. And it can be described as combat taking place within buildings, hallways, stairwells, rooms, enclosures, and other constricted spaces. CQB is important because the techniques associated with it are the foundation for any sort of recapture tactics. This would include, of course, things like what I used to do in the Marine Corps, but also just considering even things like home invasion. So why train for CQBs? Because the vast majority of the world's population resides in cities and other built up in urban environments. The political, economic, social, religious, and cultural centers of a nation are usually found with these concentrations of people in a city. As a result, cities are crucial and critical areas of interest and very likely battlefields for the near future. Buildings, homes, and enclosures have replaced the terrain of the bush as the primary locations for conflict. Right, and so the very first thing that we're going to go ahead and identify are the principles of CQB, or close quarters battle, right? And the very first principle is speed. Second one is surprise. And the third one is violence of action. Right? So when we talk about speed, what we're talking about is maintaining momentum, and it's controlling the story. At the end of the day, that's what we do. Now listen, before we get going any further, I want to tell you one of our old rules, and this is why this is important to talk about. One of my old rules is it takes a minimum of 2 people to clear a room. I prefer to have 4 making entry, but a bare minimum of 2. You can't go into a room by yourself. And yet, if we look across today's world and environment, right, you and I are probably going to be entering into rooms all by ourselves. If it ever comes to it, and I hope it doesn't have to, team, I really do. But if you get into an environment where you're bugging out, you're bugging in, you're trying to get home, you're trying to recapture the property and save and protect the ones that you love and care for, odds are you're not working with a team. You're working by yourself. And it's important to apply these fundamentals, and we're going to try to do so as it would relate to working as a single individual, as well as what it would look like with a team. All right? So speed, surprise, violence, and action. At the end of the day, speed is not rushing through anything. Right? The old adage is true. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So you want to maintain momentum. You want to control the narrative. You want to be proactive and not reactive. Does that make sense? Right, so when we talk about surprise, it's exactly that. So we don't want to announce ourselves, but once we have been announced, right, once that first flashbang has gone off, once that first round has popped off, once we start yelling and start dominating the enclosure, we need to ensure that we maintain and capitalize on our violence of action. But we don't want to announce ourselves. And listen to me, Friend, listen to me. Before you engage in close quarters combat or battle, you need to decide if the risk is worth it. For many of us, the answer is probably no. Maybe you're facing a bug out scenario, right? And you're working through to a hide site or a cache site. And you happen to look off and you see that there's a group of folks, maybe 2 or 3, and you're by yourself. And remember, you're 3 to 1 ratio, right? 3 of you against 1 of them. But here it's the opposite. You have 8 of them to 1 of you. Is it really worth it? Could you do it? Maybe. But is it worth it? And the answer is probably no, because you have people who are dependent on you to come back home. So think before you engage. Know what is going to happen, right? Never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. And in this case, never set off with some action that you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You are ready to accept that risk. But sometimes that risk is called for, right? So speed, surprise, and violence of action. These are our fundamental principles of CQB. Right? So these are our principles of CQB. Next up is our fundamentals. Within our fundamentals of CQB, there are 8. And the first one is to dominate the enclosure. Second one is to eliminate the threats. Third one is to control all occupants. Then we want to search the dead, search the room, search the living, sit rep as required, and last but not least, evac or Charlie Mike. So when we start looking through these fundamentals from 1 to 8, again, they're going to apply no matter what our tactics, our techniques, and our procedures are for moving through an enclosure, right? We need to dominate. Absolutely must dominate any sort of enclosure that we're working through, and we need to start eliminating threats, right? So as you're eliminating threats and you're working through some firing drills that you can put into your kit bag, you want to consider hammered pairs and controlled pairs. You have to make sure you eliminate the threats. You can't be working through an environment thinking, well, I'm just going to send off some wounding shots, if you will, right? That sort of mentality is not going to get you so that you can dominate the enclosure. And then we start controlling all of the occupants and making sure we're telling them exactly what we need to do. Because if they're not a threat, then we don't need to engage with deadly force, right? Use deadly force where deadly force is authorized. And then after we do have and we've maintained control of the room, we start searching the dead, searching the living, and searching the room itself, right? Always be concerned about the things that you can't see. Always be concerned about the things that you can't see, and always have eyes in the back of your head, right? As soon as you go and focus on one area, the battle space off to your right, you're exposing yourself, right? Does that make sense? So you may think that the room is cleared and that you've dominated the enclosure, but the fact of the matter is, when you're by yourself, you cannot cover 360 in your area. And you also need to be thinking about up and around you and behind you, right? And of course, if you're working with a team, that's when you start thinking about setting up a sit rep, as well as continue the Charlie Mike or continue mission or evac as required. Good to go? Right, so as we start working through an enclosure, we're basically going to start working through what we call markers on the floor, initiative based tactics, or IBT, right? And there's 3 of them. The first one, cover danger areas. The second one is to eliminate threats. The third one protect your battle buddy, right? When you start talking about initiative-based tactics, what we're talking about are the tactics that you use based off the situation, because situation is going to dictate, and you have to be able to be fluid working through an asymmetrical environment. These are the three basic principles that you need to continue to cover as you're working through your principles of CQB and your fundamentals, right? Cover all your danger areas. Use all of your senses, right? Eliminate every single threat that you have, and that threat could be a danger area, so you want to hold on it. And of course, if you're working through with a battle buddy, to make sure that you always protect. So as an example of that, if your battle buddy starts to enter into a room and you weren't ready, you weren't prepared to go, well then you're going with them, right? You have to protect each other, right? So next up, we're going to start talking about the 5 steps to clear an enclosure. Right, so the very first one is we need to clear the doorway. Now I'll show you here in a second, there's a couple ways that you can make entry into a room, whether you're working again by yourself, with a battle buddy, or with a larger team. But that entryway into a room, whether it's corner fed or center fed, or whether it's a hallway, that doorway is your fatal funnel of fire, and you have to clear it and you have to get out of there. Right? You can imagine you're working through a dark room, and all of a sudden there's a light that comes on from the outside and the door opens. Everything in that doorway is where every single last round is going to be affixed to. So if you're there, you're a target and you have to get out of there, okay? So you want to clear your immediate area, clear your corner, sweep your sector of fire, and establish dominant position. Right, so you move in through your doorway and you've got that cleared. Now you have your immediate area, right? And that's going to be, depending on the room, a 6 to 8 feet circumference around the doorway. Okay? So that area is cleared, and this is all happening at the same time. Now you chose a corner, and so you immediately clear that corner, and then you start sweeping your sector of fire and establishing a dominant position. Now, again, if you're working with a 2, 3, or 4, 6 man, or all by yourself, some of that is going to be very fluid as far as how you do different things. But again, I want to re-emphasize that always remember that you do not just have an X and a Y axis in a room, but you also have a vertical space. And you have spaces that are behind you as well, also on that vertical space. As you're working through a room, if that door is opening, just a good standard TTP for you is to follow the door, because people like to hide behind doors. And so you'll know if that door hits the wall, if anybody's behind that door or not. Or if you start to get any kind of sort of resistance, then you know that there's something going on behind that. And so you may need to stay pinned on it as you continue to clear the rest of your room, or you may need a battle buddy to come over and help clear it with you, right? So basic 5 steps to clear any enclosure. And again, this is whether we're talking about a room, whether we're talking about a hallway, whether we're talking about a large auditorium, an open space, okay? These 5 basic fundamental principles are going to apply regardless of the type of enclosure. Now, as we're looking through a room, there are 3 basic ways that you can enter into this room, okay? The very first one is that we can cross over, okay? So if we cross over and I'm working with more than one man, then my battle buddy is going to be on the opposite side, and he's going to cross over this way. The second way to get through this is by using a button hook. When I use a button hook, I'm going to enter this way, but I'm going to swing back this way and clear my opposing corner. And then my alternate, and if I had a battle buddy, he could do the same thing, right? And then my last and final way of doing this would be a combination where I will say that I'm going to sweep, do a crossover, and then my battle buddy's going to do a button hook. So that's crossover, button hook, and combination. Okay? None of these is necessarily inherently better than one or the other. They're just three options that you have in your kit bag. And hopefully you know the space that you're trying to clear. Hopefully you've been there before. You have some sort of reconnaissance. Maybe you had just some blueprints, a map. Maybe it is your space. Maybe it's a friend's space. Maybe it's a workspace. And you know the layout, and you know the additional danger areas, because again, it all sounds well and good when we start talking about just a single enclosure. But what happens when I have a closet? What happens when I have an adjacent room? What happens when I only have two and I go into a room, or if you're by yourself, you go into a room, when you come back out, that hallway is now unclear. Even though you came from the hallway and it was cleared when you went into that room, as soon as you come back out, that is another enclosure that has to be cleared. Does that make sense? Because you didn't leave anybody there to watch it. So team, that area is not clear. It has to be re-cleared. And that's the last thing that you want to do, is try to clear an enclosure in multiple spaces, multiple rooms inside a building, only to have to clear your way back out. Right? Extremely dangerous. All right, team, so over the course of the past 15 or 20 minutes or so, we've gone over a few things. We've talked about the principles of CQB, the fundamentals of CQB, some IBT, as well as the 5 steps to clear any enclosure. Hope you enjoyed the content of the video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure you drop them down in the comments below. That way we can continue to keep this conversation rolling. I appreciate all you guys, man. You stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.